They brought him gold, silver, and blades forged in legendary fires. A parade of silk and ambition marched up the steps of the obsidian throne. One by one, the daughters of the highest lords offered their treasures, hoping to buy the empty seat beside the most feared predator in the realm. Lady Genevieve of the Crimson River Pack knelt, offering a chest of uncut diamonds. She smiled. It was a perfect, practiced smile. Alpha King Silas Thorne did not blink. He stared past her, his gaze locked on the frost-covered windows of the great hall. His eyes were a dull, lifeless gray. He sat like a statue carved from winter itself. Next came Lady Nora of the Northern Crags. She presented a rare spear wrapped in snow leopard fur, a weapon fit for a conqueror. Silas barely moved a muscle. Beside him, his massive commander Garrick stepped forward to collect the weapon. The king remained entirely silent. It had been 3 days. 47 highborn women from across the 5 territories had come to claim the title of Luna. They all wanted the crown. They all wanted the power of the iron-bound kingdom. But none of them understood the man sitting on the throne, because Silas Thorne felt absolutely nothing. The curse had hollowed him out 300 years ago. First, it stole the heat from his skin. Then it erased the taste of food and the color of the sky. Eventually, it buried his emotions under thick, suffocating ice. Joy, sorrow, rage, all gone. His wolf was trapped deep inside his chest, a dormant shadow that no longer howled and no longer fought, no longer cared. He was a breathing ghost ruling a frozen empire. The 48th woman, clad in heavy emerald velvet, began to step forward. Silas felt the familiar crushing weight of endless apathy. Then a sudden crash shattered the quiet reverence of the hall. A collective gasp echoed across the stone walls. It was not a sound of awe. It was a sound of absolute disgust. Silas shifted his heavy gaze. Movement. That was all it was. The crowd near the heavy iron doors parted aggressively, people pulling their expensive cloaks away, as if trying to avoid a disease. 2 armored guards dragged a small figure forward and threw her roughly onto the cold stone floor. She was tiny, fragile. Her dress was an unrecognizable shade of dirty gray, torn at the hem and frayed at the sleeves. Her dark hair was tangled in a messy braid. A fresh, ugly purple bruise covered the left side of her jaw. She looked like a gust of wind could break her. Lord Vance, the cruel alpha of the Silver Moon Pack, stormed out from the crowd. His face was twisted in rage. "She is a rat." Vance spat, his voice booming through the silent hall. "A nameless, useless, wolfless creature. She has been following our carriages for miles. I apologize for this stain on your floor, my king. Guards drag this Omega out and throw her to the wild rogues." The guards reached for her. The girl did not scream. She did not beg for mercy. She did not cry. She slowly lifted her head and looked straight at the throne. Straight into the lifeless gray eyes of Silas Thorne. Deep inside Silas, something twitched. A muscle memory. A phantom beat. His dormant wolf slowly, sluggishly opened one eye. "Stop!" The word tore from Silas's throat. His voice was raw, deep, and gravelly from disuse. It was the first time he had spoken a word in weeks. It cracked like a whip across the frozen room. The guards froze instantly. They dropped their hands and backed away, terrified. Garrick turned to his king, his scarred face pale. Silas ignored everyone. His eyes were locked on the fragile girl on the floor. She pushed herself up. Her hands were raw, covered in old scars and fresh dirt. She stood alone in the center of the massive aisle, surrounded by mocking lords and sneering ladies. Yet she stood perfectly still. Her chin tilted up. She reached into the pocket of her ragged dress. Every guard in the room tensed hands on their swords. What could a beggar possibly draw against a king? Her small, trembling hands produced a piece of bread. It was dark, stale crust. The kind of cheap, hard bread tossed out by the lowest taverns. It was half-eaten. She had clearly been saving it to survive the brutal winter. She began to walk. The silence in the hall was deafening. The air grew thick, suffocating with shock. 47 noble daughters watched in absolute disbelief as this bruised, filthy outcast walked up the obsidian steps of the throne. She did not kneel. She did not bow. She stopped right in front of the Alpha King. She looked into his hollow, terrifying face with soft, dark eyes that held absolutely no fear, only an ocean of sorrow. She extended her small, bruised hands, offering him the stale crust of bread. "You look hungry." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it rang louder than any battle horn in Silas's ears. She wasn't talking about his stomach. She saw right through the iron crown, right through the terrifying reputation. She saw the starving, freezing, dying man buried beneath 3 centuries of ice. Silas stared at the bread. The great hall held its breath. Slowly, heavily, he reached out his massive hand. His rough, calloused fingers brushed against her small, fragile ones. Skin met skin. Fire, pure, unadulterated fire, ripped through Silas's veins. It started at the tips of his fingers and exploded up his arm, crashing into his chest like a falling star. Warmth. Real, blistering, agonizing warmth. His heart slammed against his ribs. Thump, thump, thump. His wolf asleep for 300 years violently tore free from its chains. It threw its head back and roared. A deafening, earth-shattering howl that echoed purely in Silas's mind. "Mate, mate, mine." Silas gasped. His fingers clamped around the bread and her hand at the same time. His grip was desperate. The dull gray in his eyes suddenly vanished. A blinding liquid gold flooded his irises. The air around them crackled with an invisible heavy static. Elara felt it. The shockwave of the bond hit her small frame. A sweet, intoxicating scent of crushed pine needles, dark earth, and winter frost filled her lungs. She shivered violently. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her chest. She took a half step back, her eyes wide with shock. "Who are you?" Silas breathed out. His voice was unrecognizable. It was thick with a desperate, terrifying hunger. Elara swallowed hard, but her chest rising and falling rapidly. "My name is Elara. I have no pack. I have no family. I came because I was hungry too." Behind them, Lord Vance lost his patience. "This is an outrage. She is a defective Omega. I banished her from the Silver Moon Pack myself. She is garbage." Silas's golden eyes snapped toward Vance. The sheer murderous pressure that flooded the room brought half the lords to their knees. "Speak again." Silas snarled, his voice vibrating the stone walls. "And I will tear your throat out with my teeth." The hall descended into terrified silence. No one breathed. Silas slowly stood up from the throne. He towered over Elara, but his aura softened the moment his eyes returned to her. He looked down at the bruise on her cheek. The phantom heat in his hand was already trying to fade the cold creeping back in. He needed her closer. He needed her scent. "You stay," Silas commanded. It was not a threat. It was a desperate plea hidden beneath a royal order. Elara looked up at him. She saw the gold flickering in his eyes, fighting a losing battle against the gray. She felt the unnatural cold radiating from his massive body. "I am not a prisoner," Elara whispered softly. "I belong to no one." "Then stay because you want to," Silas replied, his golden eyes pleading with hers. For a long moment, Elara held the gaze of the most dangerous man alive. Then slowly she nodded. In the shadows behind the throne, Lady Sybil, the ancient royal advisor, narrowed her dark eyes. Her lips thinned into a hard, unforgiving line. The curse had held for 300 years. She would not let a dirty Omega break it now. They gave her a room in the East Tower. It was a massive stone chamber with a heavy oak door and a narrow arched window overlooking the frozen training courtyard below. To the High Lords of the court, this isolation was a prison. To Elara, it was the first true sanctuary she had ever known. She stood perfectly still in the center of the room. She wrapped her thin, scarred arms tightly around her small body. Her skin was prickling. Her blood felt entirely too warm. The lingering scent of the Alpha King was still burned deep into her senses. It was an intoxicating, heavy mixture of dark, earth-crushed pine needles and biting winter frost. Every single time she inhaled, Her heart stuttered violently in her chest. Thump, pause, thump, pause. A violent shiver racked her spine. She knew what a mate bond was. Every wolf in the kingdom knew the legends. It was a sacred, unbreakable tie forged by the moon goddess herself. But she had been taught all her life that she was broken. A defective, worthless thing. An omega who had never shifted. A girl without a wolf. Lord Vance had made absolute sure she never forgot her place. The cruel alpha of the Silver Moon Pack had ordered her whipped, just for looking a ranked warrior in the eye. He had forced her to sleep on the freezing stones of the kitchen floor. He had starved her for days when she failed to clean the massive pack house fast enough. She raised a trembling hand and gently touched the ugly dark purple bruise blooming on her jaw. Vance had given her that brutal strike just yesterday, right before she was thrown violently out of the carriage caravan into the deep, freezing snow. They had left her bleeding on the road. They had laughed as they rode away toward the royal capital. But when Silas touched her, when the massive, terrifying Alpha King brushed his calloused fingers against hers, she did not feel weak. She did not feel broken. She felt a spark deep inside her soul, a blinding, terrifying spark that desperately wanted to roar. A quiet, hesitant knock at the heavy oak door broke her spiraling thoughts. Elara flinched, her body tensing out of pure habit. A small, older woman stepped inside. She was carrying a heavy wooden tray. Hot, fragrant steam rose from a deep bowl of thick meat stew and a loaf of fresh, soft bread. The woman had kind, tired eyes and wore the simple, flour-dusted apron of a kitchen servant. "I am Martha," the woman said gently, keeping her voice low. "I run the lower kitchens. I brought you some proper dinner, child." Elara stared at the steaming food. Her stomach ached with a hollow, agonizing, twisting pain. She had not eaten a full meal in weeks. But she hesitated. She took a step back, her dark eyes scanning the older woman with deep suspicion. She was not used to kindness. Kindness in the Silver Moon Pack usually ended in a trap. "Why are you helping me?" Elara asked. Her voice was quiet, raspy from the biting winter cold. Martha slowly placed the heavy tray on the small wooden table near the hearth. "Because you did what no one else in this castle could do. You made the Alpha King speak. You made him stand up from that cursed throne. But you must listen to me very carefully, child. You are in terrible, terrible danger here." Elara stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. "Danger from Lord Vance." Martha shook her head, her kind eyes darkening with genuine fear. "No, Lord Vance is a loud, arrogant fool. The danger in this fortress is much older and much, much quieter." Martha stepped closer to Elara, lowering her voice to an absolute whisper. 3 months ago, a beautiful noblewoman named Lady Clara caught the king's attention. She was brave. She made him smile, just once. A small, fleeting smile in the gardens. The entire court saw it. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. What happened to her? The next morning she was gone. Martha whispered, looking nervously toward the heavy door. Lady Sybil, the king's royal advisor, told the court that Clara ran away in the middle of the night. She said the girl could not handle the pressure of the crown. But I work in the lower levels. I saw Clara's horse. It was still in the royal stables. I saw her handmaiden weeping over her travel trunks. Her clothes were still folded inside. Lady Clara never left this castle. A cold dread pooled in Elara's stomach. Gone. Dead. Lady Sybil serves the throne. Martha continued, her hands trembling slightly. She has served the Thorne family for 3 generations, but she controls the ice in this castle. She controls who gets close to the Alpha King. Do not trust her. Do not eat anything she sends to this room. Do not walk the dark corridors alone. Martha turned quickly and slipped out the door, her footsteps fading down the stone spiral staircase. Elara was left completely alone with the steaming stew and a heavy, terrifying realization settling over her like a suffocating blanket. The Alpha King was not just a victim of a random curse. He was being deliberately held captive inside his own freezing mind. and whoever was keeping him trapped in that endless winter would easily slaughter anyone who tried to thaw him out. She walked over to the narrow window and pressed her hand against the freezing glass. The wind howled furiously through the dark mountains. She was a wolfless Omega. She had no power. She had no army. But as she touched her chest right over her furiously beating heart, she felt that strange, warm spark glowing brighter. She was not going to run. 3 agonizing nights passed. The massive fortress of Ironbound remained trapped in a suffocating, unnatural winter. For Silas Thorne, those 3 days were sheer, absolute torture. The exact moment Elara had pulled her small hand away from his in the Great Hall, the ancient curse had returned with a brutal, punishing vengeance. The ice had violently clawed its way back into his veins. The dull, lifeless gray had instantly swallowed his vision, draining the vibrant colors from the world. The crushing weight of absolute apathy slammed down on his lungs, making every breath feel like inhaling jagged glass. But this time the numbness was infinitely worse, because now he remembered. He remembered exactly what warmth felt like. He remembered the blinding, agonizing rush of pure fire racing through his blood. He remembered the delicate, intoxicating smell of wild thyme and fresh rain that clung to her fragile skin. His wolf, the massive beast that had been comatose for 3 centuries, was now thrashing violently against the icy cage in his chest. It roared day and night. It tore at his insides with phantom claws. It demanded its mate. It demanded the brave little Omega with the sad, defiant eyes and the ragged dress. Silas could not sleep. He could not eat. He paced the heavy stone corridors of his castle in the dead of night like a starving, caged predator. His heavy boots echoed against the ancient stones. He told himself he was just patrolling the grounds. He told himself he was securing the fortress against rogue attacks. He lied to himself. His feet carried him blindly, instinctively toward the East Tower, toward the massive dusty oak doors of the ancient royal library. He pushed the heavy doors open. They creaked loudly in the suffocating silence. The massive room was entirely dark, save for a single dying fire burning low in the giant stone hearth. Sitting on the thick, woven rug directly before the glowing embers was Elara. She was wearing a simple, oversized white nightgown that Martha had found for her. Her dark, beautiful hair cascaded down her back in loose, natural waves. She was hunched over a massive, ancient, leather-bound tome that looked almost as big as her torso. Silas stepped into the room. He made absolutely no sound, moving with the lethal grace of an apex predator. But Elara gasped and spun around instantly. The mate bond snapped taut between them like a high-voltage wire. Silas felt a violent electric jolt strike dead center in his chest. His wolf slammed heavily against his ribs, howling a single possessive word. "Mine, mine, mine!" "You are reading," Silas said. His voice was a low, rough rumble. It lacked the terrifying royal authority he usually commanded in the throne room. It sounded broken, exhausted, desperate. Elara did not cower from his massive, intimidating presence. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the dying embers. "An old village healer taught me when I was a child. Lord Vance had me brutally whipped when he found out. He said Omegas did not need letters. But I never forgot how." She turned back to the massive book. The soft firelight danced across her pale skin. The dark purple bruise on her jaw was finally fading to a dull, sickly yellow. "What are you reading?" Silas asked. He took a slow, heavy step closer. The unnatural, freezing cold radiating off his massive body made the flames in the hearth flicker violently and dim. "The history of the blood frost curse," Elara said softly. She ran her small, scarred finger over the faded, cryptic runes painted on the ancient parchment. "It says, the curse was cast 300 years ago by a Dark Coven witch. It was designed to drain the Alpha King's life force slowly over centuries. First his body heat, then his sensory emotions, then his wolf, and finally his heart stops beating entirely." Silas stopped just a few feet away from her. his massive hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "I know the history," he said coldly, the curse attempting to freeze his vocal cords. Elara looked up, her dark eyes pierced straight through his terrifying icy facade. "But do you know how it is actively sustained?" Silas frowned, his thick brows pulling together. "A curse this massive, this powerful, cannot simply survive on its own for 3 centuries. Elara continued, her voice gaining a fierce, desperate strength. "It requires an anchor, a living anchor. Someone close to the throne. Someone who feeds the ice with dark magic every single day to keep you weak, to keep you perfectly under control." Silas went perfectly terrifyingly still. The silence in the grand library was absolute. The words hung heavily in the freezing air, sharp and lethal. An anchor. Someone close. His mind violently flashed back through 300 years of empty gray days. The endless war councils, the political manipulation, the advisor who had always been standing right at his side, the woman who had served his father before he died of the very same cold. "Lady Sybil." Silas breathed out the name. It felt like toxic ash on his tongue. "She has been here since before the curse was cast," Elara whispered, standing up slowly. "She controls the entire court. She manages your royal schedule. And when a noblewoman named Lady Clara made you smile 3 months ago, Lady Sybil made sure she disappeared in the dead of night." The cold deep inside Silas suddenly shifted. It was no longer a dull, hollow, depressing apathy. It sharpened instantly. It turned into something violently lethal. A deep, terrifying, world-ending rage began to crack the thick ice surrounding his heart. "Why are you telling me this?" Silas asked. His voice dropped into a lethal, dominant alpha register that vibrated the ancient glass in the windows. His eyes violently flickered with dangerous, predatory gold. "Because I know exactly what it feels like to be trapped," Elara said. She stepped closer to him. She was so tiny. She barely reached the center of his massive chest. But she did not back down an inch. She looked up at the most terrifying Alpha King in history, with nothing but fierce, unyielding, protective determination. "I know what it feels like to be starved, beaten, and kept weak by those in power," Elara whispered fiercely. "You took my bread, Silas Thorne. You let me see the starving man beneath the terrifying ice. I will not let that witch kill you." Silas closed the remaining distance between them in a single desperate stride. He was huge, towering over her, radiating a deadly, freezing chill that would have sent any battle-hardened warrior running in terror. His massive hands trembled violently as he raised them, stopping just an inch from her soft face. He was terrified of breaking her. He was terrified of the cold hurting her. "If I touch you," Silas whispered. His voice completely cracked with raw, naked agony. "The warmth will come back. I know it will. But the curse will fight it. It will violently rip the heat away again. And the cold is so much worse every single time it returns." Elara reached up. She did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She placed both of her small, warm palms flat against his icy, sharp cheekbones. Fire violently exploded in the dark library. Silas gasped a loud, desperate sound. A broken, tearing roar ripped from his throat. The blazing gold completely shattered the dead gray in his eyes. Heat, blinding, beautiful, agonizing heat poured into his freezing veins like liquid sun. His massive arms immediately wrapped around her tiny waist, pulling her flush against his hard chest. He buried his face deep into the crook of her neck, aggressively inhaling the intoxicating scent of wild thyme and fresh rain. His heart restarted with a deafening thud. Thump. 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 Elara gasped out loud as the mate bond violently flared. Her entire body tingled with raw, beautiful electricity. She wrapped her thin arms tightly around his broad, muscular shoulders, holding the trembling giant of a king. "Then, we will just have to break the curse." Elara whispered softly into his dark hair, holding him tighter as the winter raged outside. The great hall was completely transformed for the final royal feast. Massive chandeliers forged from dark iron and dripping with hundreds of thick white candles hung from the vaulted stone ceiling. The long, heavy oak tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, spiced winter root vegetables, and chalices filled with deep dark wine. Every high lord, every noble lady, and every ranked warrior of the iron-bound kingdom was present. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a night where alliances were finalized and the Alpha King announced his chosen Luna. Instead, the atmosphere in the room was thick with absolute suffocating tension. No one was eating. No one was laughing. The heavy silence in the room felt like a physical weight pressing down on their chests. At the head of the great hall, sitting upon his obsidian throne, was Silas Thorne. He looked terrifying. His massive frame was rigid and locked in a brutal internal war that no one else could see. The curse was fighting back with a vicious, punishing ferocity. Thick, unnatural frost crawled up the back of his dark throne. The air immediately surrounding him was so freezing that his every breath plumed into a thick white cloud. But beneath that lethal ice, his wolf was awake, and it was furious. Silas kept his eyes fixed entirely on the heavy iron doors at the far end of the hall. His golden irises flickered violently through the dead gray, a visual manifestation of his desperate fight for control. He was tracking a single scent, a faint, beautiful whisper of wild thyme and fresh rain that drifted through the heavy smells of roasted meat and burning wax. The heavy doors groaned loudly as they were pushed open. Every head in the massive hall turned at once. Elara stood in the doorway. She did not look like the broken, filthy Omega who had been thrown onto the stone floor 3 days ago. Martha had found her a dress deep in the royal storage. It was an ancient, simple gown of deep midnight blue velvet. It had no jewels, no heavy gold embroidery like the dresses worn by the noble daughters. But it fit her perfectly. It wrapped around her small, delicate frame, making her pale skin look like porcelain. Her dark hair was braided elegantly down her back, but it was not the dress that silenced the room. It was the way she walked. She did not keep her eyes to the floor like an Omega. She did not tremble. She walked directly down the center aisle, her chin held high, her dark eyes locked entirely on the Alpha King. As she walked past the long tables, the ranked wolves began to gasp. Lord Vance, sitting near the front, dropped his heavy silver goblet. Dark wine spilled across the table like blood. He could smell it. They could all smell it. Woven deeply into the scent of wild thyme and rain was a heavy, dominant, terrifyingly powerful note of crushed pine needles and dark winter earth. The Alpha King's scent. She was marked, not with a bite, but with an energetic claim so raw and powerful that it suffocated every other alpha in the room. The mate bond was screaming its existence to the entire kingdom. Silas leaned forward on his throne. The stone beneath his massive hands cracked audibly. A deep territorial rumble vibrated in his chest. His golden eyes locked onto Elara, and for a fleeting, beautiful second, the freezing temperature in the hall spiked into blistering heat. But before Elara could reach the steps of the throne, a sharp, cold voice cut through the silence like a jagged blade. "I invoke the ancient right of purity." Lady Sybil stepped out from the shadows behind the high table. The royal advisor wore sweeping robes of pitch black. Her silver hair was pulled back tightly, and her dark eyes gleamed with a vicious, calculating malice. She walked to the center of the room, blocking Elara's path to the throne. The entire hall erupted into shocked whispers. Garrick, the massive commander, immediately stepped forward, his hand resting heavily on the hilt of his broadsword. Silas stood up. His massive chair groaned. The gold in his eyes flared with absolute murderous intent. "Sybil," he growled. The sound was not human. It was the pure, unfiltered voice of a feral beast ready to slaughter. "Step aside. Now." Lady Sybil did not flinch. She raised her head, projecting her voice so every lord and warrior could hear. "I serve the Iron Crown, my king, as my mother did, and her mother before her. The ancient laws dictate that the Alpha King cannot be mated to a weak, wolfless Omega. It taints the royal bloodline. It threatens the safety of our kingdom." Vance immediately slammed his fist on the table, standing up. "She is right. The girl is defective. She is a spy sent to weaken us." Sybil pointed a long, bony finger directly at Elara. "She is using dark charms to manipulate the king's mind. I invoke the sacred challenge of blood, a trial by combat. Let the moon goddess decide if this creature is truly worthy of standing beside the throne." A collective gasp swept through the hall. A blood challenge. By ancient wolf law, it was the most sacred rite. Once invoked, it could not be cancelled, not even by the Alpha King himself. If Silas intervened to stop a sacred challenge, he would be instantly branded a tyrant who broke the covenant of the moon goddess. The 5 territories would rebel. The kingdom would tear itself apart in bloody civil war. Sybil knew exactly what she was doing. She was trapping him. She knew Silas was still weakened by the 300-year curse. She knew Elara had no wolf to defend herself. Sybil intended to slaughter the Omega, publicly re-establish absolute terror, and plunge the king back into eternal ice. Silas vaulted over the massive table. He landed between Elara and Sybil with a deafening crash that shook the stone floor. He towered over the witch, his massive chest heaving, his claws extending from his fingertips. The cold radiating off him was so intense that the nearest candles instantly blew out. "I will tear you apart piece by piece," Silas snarled, his voice vibrating with earth-shattering rage. "I do not care about the ancient laws. She is my mate. You will not touch her." Sybil smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile. "If you break the sacred law, Silas, your lords will abandon you. You will lose your army. You will lose your kingdom. And you will still die from the cold." Silas raised his massive clawed hand, fully prepared to rip her head off and burn the kingdom to ashes if it meant keeping Elara safe. But a small, warm hand gently wrapped around his thick wrist. Silas froze. Elara stepped out from behind his massive shielding frame. She looked up at him, her dark eyes completely calm. The warmth of her touch sent a desperate, aching pulse of life into his freezing veins. "Do not break your kingdom for me," Elara whispered softly. She turned away from the terrified, furious Alpha King. She looked directly into the malicious dark eyes of Lady Sybil. She did not tremble. She did not shrink back. She stood incredibly tall. "I accept your challenge," Elara said. Her voice rang clear and loud, echoing off the high stone walls. Silas roared a sound of pure agony and denial. "No, Elara, no! She will kill you!" Elara reached up and touched his freezing cheek. Her smile was soft, heartbreakingly brave. "You told me to stay because I wanted to. I want to stay, Silas. And I am done letting monsters tell me I am weak." She looked back at the witch. "Tomorrow at dawn, in the fighting pits." Dawn broke over the iron-bound fortress like a bruised, bleeding wound. The sky was a heavy, oppressive shade of dark purple and gray. A bitter, freezing wind whipped violently through the open-air fighting pits behind the castle walls. The entire court had gathered. Hundreds of wolves stood on the elevated stone terraces, their breath pluming in the freezing air. They looked down into the massive circular arena of packed dirt and ice. The silence was deafening. Every single eye was glued to the center of the pit. Silas stood on the royal balcony directly above the arena. He was not sitting on his viewing throne. He was gripping the thick iron railing with both hands. The metal was groaning, bending and warping under his terrifying, bone-crushing grip. His eyes were blazing predatory gold. His chest heaved with ragged, heavy breaths. Garrick stood right beside him, flanked by 10 elite guards. They were not there to protect the king. They were there to physically restrain him from jumping into the pit and slaughtering everyone. Elara walked into the arena. She wore simple leather breeches and a heavy linen tunic. She was barefoot. The freezing ice bit into her skin, but she did not shiver. She looked incredibly tiny in the center of the massive, bloody fighting pit. She had no sword. She had no armor. She had no wolf. From the opposite gate, Lady Sybil stepped out. The witch did not bother with human form. She instantly shifted. The crowd screamed as a monstrous, unnatural beast tore out of the shadows. Sybil was a massive, hulking black wolf, but she was severely mutated by 3 centuries of dark magic. Sickly violet energy crackled wildly along her dark fur. Her eyes glowed with toxic black light. She was twice the size of a normal warrior wolf, radiating a suffocating, rotting stench of decay. Vance laughed loudly from the terraces. "The rat will be dead in 3 seconds." Sybil did not hesitate. She did not circle her prey. She launched her massive, unnatural body across the frozen dirt, her massive jaws snapping open, aiming directly for Elara's throat. Elara threw herself violently to the right. Sybil's heavy claws swiped through the air, catching Elara's shoulder. Pain exploded across Elara's body. The dark magic burned like acid. The heavy strike sent her flying across the ice. She crashed hard into the rough stone wall of the arena. Silas completely lost his mind. "No!" Silas roared a deafening, world-ending sound. He ripped the thick iron railing entirely out of the stone. He lunged forward, ready to drop into the pit. Garrick slammed into him, wrapping his massive arms around the king's waist. "Hold him down!" Garrick bellowed to the guards, "For the love of the goddess, hold the king!" 10 elite warriors piled onto Silas, desperately trying to hold back the furious, roaring alpha. Silas thrashed violently, his fangs bared his golden eyes, weeping with pure rage and terror. He watched helplessly as Elara slumped against the stone wall. Bright red blood dripped down Elara's arm. It hit the pure white snow with a soft, sickening hiss. Left bleeding, hunted, broken. The heavy, toxic memories of her entire life flashed before her eyes. Vance laughing, the pack turning their backs, the freezing kitchen floor, the constant suffocating fear. Sybil slowly stalked toward her, black saliva dripping from her monstrous fangs. The witch was taking her time now, feeding on the absolute terror radiating from the crowd. Elara pressed her uninjured hand into the freezing dirt. She forced herself to her knees. She looked up at the royal balcony. She saw Silas fighting like a madman, his eyes filled with such pure, agonizing love and terror for her. He was dying inside because of this witch. The entire kingdom was freezing because of this witch. "No more," Elara whispered. Deep inside her chest, the tiny warm spark she had felt for 3 days suddenly exploded. It was not a spark, it was a sun. Thump. A heartbeat so loud it echoed physically through the entire arena. Every single wolf in the stand suddenly gasped, grabbing their chests. Thump. The blood that had dripped from Elara's shoulder onto the snow suddenly began to glow. Sybil stopped, her toxic black eyes widening in sudden primal confusion. Elara slowly stood up. She closed her eyes. A blinding, explosive shockwave of pure, radiating white light erupted violently from her small body. The blast wave shattered the ice in the arena. It blew the massive black wolf backward, sending Sybil crashing into the dirt. The blinding light shot up into the heavy gray sky, violently tearing through the suffocating storm clouds. For the first time in 300 years, pure, warm, golden sunlight struck the iron-bound fortress. Silas stopped fighting his guards. He froze, falling to his knees on the balcony, gasping for air. The sheer overwhelming warmth washing over the arena hit him like a physical tidal wave. The ice in his veins completely melted in a single agonizingly beautiful second. The curse violently shattered inside his chest. He could feel everything. He could smell the earth. He could feel the sun on his face. Down in the arena, the blinding white light slowly faded. The crowd erupted into chaotic, terrified screaming, dropping to their knees in absolute awe. Standing in the center of the pit was not a broken Omega. It was a wolf. But it was not a normal wolf. She was magnificent. She was ethereal. Her fur was the color of fresh, untouched snow, glowing with a soft, internal, divine luminescence. She was massive, standing just as tall as an alpha. Her eyes burned with pure liquid silver. She was a Solaris wolf, the White Queen, a sacred legendary bloodline thought to be extinct for 1,000 years. Her power had not been broken. It had been dormant, hiding deep inside her blood, waiting for the true mate bond to trigger its awakening. Sybil scrambled to her feet, howling in absolute fury. The witch launched herself at the White Wolf dark violet magic pouring from her jaws. Elara did not dodge this time. The White Wolf stepped forward and let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. She met the monstrous Black Wolf mid-air. It was not even a contest. Elara's divine glowing claws slashed through Sybil's dark magic like a hot knife through butter. The white light violently burned away the toxic violet energy. Sybil screamed in pure agony as the stolen magic was literally burned out of her blood. With one final massive strike, Elara pinned the giant Black Wolf to the ground. Her heavy silver paws pressed hard against Sybil's throat. The White Wolf opened her jaws, the pure light gathering in her throat. But she did not bite. Elara channeled the blinding, purifying light directly into Sybil's chest. The crowd watched in terrified fascination as thick, black, oily threads suddenly became visible in the air. The threads of the 300-year-old curse. They connected Sybil's dark heart to the royal balcony. Elara bit down violently on the black threads. She shattered them. A massive, echoing boom rang across the mountains. The dark magic exploded into harmless gray ash. Sybil's monstrous wolf form violently collapsed, shrinking rapidly back into the frail, ancient, powerless human body of the witch. She lay unconscious and entirely broken in the dirt. The fight was over. The White Wolf stood victorious in the center of the sunlit arena. She raised her magnificent glowing head toward the royal balcony. Silas Thorne, no longer a cursed ghost, stared down at his fully awakened mate. Tears, real warm, salty tears streamed down his face. The blinding white light slowly faded from the fighting pit, leaving behind a profound, stunned silence. For the first time in 3 centuries, the iron-bound fortress was not wrapped in a suffocating blizzard. The heavy, dark gray clouds fractured. Beams of pure, brilliant golden sunlight pierced through the sky, striking the ancient stone walls. The thick layers of frost covering the arena immediately began to weep, melting into thousands of tiny glittering droplets. Up on the royal balcony, Silas Thorne slowly pushed himself up from the stone floor. He was breathing heavily, his massive chest rising and falling in deep, greedy gasps. He looked at his own hands. They were trembling, not from the cold, from the sheer, overwhelming, paralyzing surge of life returning to his veins. He could feel the texture of the rough stone beneath his boots. He could feel the gentle, warm breeze brushing against his face. But most importantly, his wolf was singing. It was a deep, resonant, joyous hum that vibrated through his very soul. Down in the arena, the magnificent White Wolf lowered her massive head. Her silver eyes locked onto Silas. Slowly, a soft, radiant glow enveloped her body as she shifted back into her human form. Elara stood in the center of the melting ice. The dark blue dress was torn at the shoulder, her dark hair wildly unraveled, and she was completely exhausted. But she was breathing. She was alive, and she was radiating a quiet, absolute power that brought every single warrior in the stands to absolute silence. Silas did not take the stairs. The Alpha King vaulted directly over the heavy stone balcony, dropping 30 feet into the arena below. He landed with a heavy, earth-shaking thud, his boots crushing the remaining ice. He did not walk toward her. He ran. The terrifying, ruthless Alpha King sprinted across the dirt like a desperate, starving man. When he reached her, he did not stop. He crashed into her, dropping to his knees in the wet dirt, wrapping his massive arms around her tiny waist and burying his face deep into her stomach. Elara. He breathed out her name. It was a wrecked, broken sound, a prayer and a sob all at once. Elara. Elara gently sank down into the dirt with him. She wrapped her small arms around his broad, shaking shoulders. She buried her face in his dark hair, inhaling the rich, intoxicating scent of pine and dark earth. Silas pulled back just enough to look at her face. His golden eyes were bright, shining with unshed tears. He reached up his large, calloused hands, gently cupping her jaw, his thumbs tracing the fading purple bruise that Vance had given her. His touch was completely different now. It was not a desperate, painful clash of fire and ice. It was a steady, radiating, deeply comforting heat, a hearth fire meant to keep her safe forever. "You saved me," Silas whispered, his voice trembling with an emotion so vast and profound, it nearly broke him. "You broke the ice. You brought back the sun." "I told you," Elara smiled softly, her own tears spilling over her eyelashes. "I was not going to let the monsters win." A loud, terrified groan interrupted them. Lady Sybil, now nothing more than a frail, powerless old woman, was attempting to crawl away through the wet dirt. Her dark magic was completely gone. The 3 centuries of unnaturally extended life were rapidly catching up to her. Her hair was falling out in gray clumps, her skin wrinkling and decaying by the second. Garrick, the massive commander, marched into the arena with 10 heavy guards. He did not ask for orders. He grabbed the old witch by the back of her robes and hauled her roughly to her feet. "Throw her in the deepest, darkest cell beneath the mountains," Silas commanded. His voice was no longer broken. It was the terrifying, absolute boom of a true alpha king in his prime. "Let her live out the rest of her miserable, pathetic life, feeling the exact same cold she forced upon me for 300 years. "Take her away," Garrick barked. The guards dragged the screaming, sobbing witch out of the arena. Silas stood up, towering over the pit. He reached down and gently pulled Elara to her feet. He kept her tucked securely against his massive chest, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist as a protective shield. Then the king turned his burning golden gaze toward the elevated stone terraces. He found the man he was looking for instantly. "Lord Vance." Silas's voice cracked through the arena like a whip of pure lightning. "Get down here, now!" Up in the stands, the cruel alpha of the Silver Moon Pack turned completely pale. He was trembling violently. The arrogant lord who had beaten Elara, starved her, and thrown her into the snow, now looked like a terrified, trapped rat. Vance stumbled down the stone steps. His knees shook so violently he almost fell. He walked into the arena, the wet dirt soaking his expensive leather boots. He stopped 10 feet away from the king and the White Queen, immediately dropping to his knees. "My King Vance," stammered, his voice pathetic and weak. "I did not know. I swear to the goddess, I did not know she was a Solaris wolf. If I had known, I would have protected her. I would have treated her like royalty." Silas let out a dark, menacing growl that vibrated the very air around them. "You beat her because you thought she was weak." Silas snarled, taking a slow, heavy step forward. "You starved her because you thought no one would care. You left her bleeding in the snow because you are a coward. A weak, pathetic coward who only feels strong when he is hurting those smaller than him." Vance pressed his forehead completely into the dirt, sobbing openly. "Mercy, my king. Please, mercy." "You do not deserve mercy," Silas said coldly. "You do not deserve the rank of Alpha. As of this exact moment, your title is stripped. Your lands are confiscated. Your wealth belongs to the ironbound crown. You are banished from all 5 territories. If any ranked wolf sees your face within my borders by nightfall, they have my direct order to tear you apart." Vance wailed in absolute despair. 2 guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing the disgraced lord by the arms and dragging him out of the arena like garbage. Silas turned his attention back to the entire gathered court. Hundreds of lords, noble ladies, and elite warriors stood completely silent, watching their king. Silas reached up to his head. He gripped the heavy obsidian iron crown that had rested on his brow, the crown that had been a freezing cage for his entire life. He slowly pulled it off. The entire court gasped. Silas turned to Elara. He looked down at the tiny, beautiful woman who had offered him a stale crust of bread when the rest of the world had offered him empty fortunes. He gently placed the dark iron crown upon Elara's head. It fit perfectly. The dark metal contrasted beautifully with her pale skin and dark hair glowing softly in the returning sunlight. "Elara," Silas said, his voice loud enough for every single wolf in the fortress to hear. "The White Queen, the savior of the ironbound kingdom, my mate, my Luna, my equal in all things." And then the most feared, ruthless predator in the world did the unthinkable. Alpha King Silas Thorne took a step back, lowered his massive body, and dropped to one knee before her. He bowed his dark head, exposing his neck to her, in the ultimate absolute submission of an alpha to his chosen queen. For a second, the crowd was completely stunned. Then Garrick drew his massive broadsword. He drove the blade down into the dirt, dropping to one knee. One by one, the elite guards knelt. Then the high lords. Then the noble ladies who had come to compete for the throne. Then the warriors. Like a massive rolling wave, hundreds of wolves across the terraces, and the arena dropped to their knees, bowing their heads deeply to the Omega they had once called trash. Elara stood in the center of the kneeling kingdom. The sunlight bathed her in a warm, golden glow. She looked down at Silas, the massive, terrifying king who was kneeling in the dirt just for her. She gently reached out, placing her small hands on his broad shoulders. "Stand up, my king." Elara whispered softly, her heart overflowing with absolute love. Silas stood, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her into a deep, passionate kiss as the entire kingdom erupted into joyous, deafening howls that echoed all the way to the heavens. 3 months later, the iron-bound fortress was unrecognizable. The dark, depressing gray stones were now covered in thick, vibrant green ivy. The massive courtyards, once frozen and dead, were bursting with wild, colorful flowers. Crimson roses climbed the battlements, and the sweet, intoxicating scent of blooming jasmine filled the warm spring air. The curse was truly dead. Silas stood on the grand balcony of their royal bedchamber, wearing only a loose linen shirt. He was leaning against the stone railing, watching the sun slowly set behind the majestic mountains, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of violet gold and deep orange. He took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, clean, warm air. He still could not get over the colors. He spent hours just looking at the sky, mesmerized by the simple beauty he had been denied for 3 centuries. Soft, bare footsteps approached from behind. 2 small, gentle arms wrapped around his thick waist. Elara pressed her soft cheek against his wide back. He immediately turned around, wrapping her securely in his arms and lifting her slightly off the floor. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her sweet scent, kissing the soft skin below her ear. "You are working too late again." My Luna Silas murmured, his voice a deep, loving rumble against her skin. "The kingdom can survive 1 evening without you reviewing the agricultural reports." Elara laughed. It was a beautiful musical sound that made Silas's wolf purr with absolute contentment. "I am almost done. I was just organizing some of the new trade agreements with the Silver Moon Pack. They elected a new alpha, by the way. A good man." He sent a formal letter of apology for the past. Silas frowned slightly, a protective growl rumbling in his chest. "Throw it in the fire." "No." Elara smiled, reaching up to run her fingers through his dark hair. "I think I will keep it. It reminds me of how far we have come. Just like your favorite decoration in the Great Hall." Silas smiled, his golden eyes shining with pure affection. Down in the massive Great Hall, hanging right above the towering obsidian throne, was a small, custom-made glass display case forged from pure gold. Inside it, carefully preserved for all of history to see, was not a rare diamond, not a legendary sword. It was a small, stale, half-eaten crust of bread. Every visiting lord, every arrogant noble, and every new warrior who entered the hall had to look at it. It was Silas's absolute command, a permanent reminder to the entire kingdom. Every woman brought him gold and power. She brought him a piece of bread, and he never forgot it. Silas leaned down, capturing Elara's lips in a slow, deep, devastatingly tender kiss. The mate bond hummed beautifully between them, a perfect, unbreakable harmony of light and shadow of the White Queen and her Alpha King. The winter was finally over, and their spring would last forever. That is the end of our story for today. I truly hope you enjoyed this emotional journey of Elara and Silas as much as I loved sharing it with you. What was your absolute favorite moment in this story? Did you feel the chills when Elara finally awakened as the White Queen? Or was it the moment the Alpha King knelt before her? Please let me know. Down in the comments below, I read every single one of them. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another epic romance. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all in the next tale.